So I'll tell you exactly where we're up to. Daf Tes Amud Aleph. And nice, we will go back into Yom Kippur as well, because there's a nice source here. 4 lines down. Because if you remember, we took off a few weeks where we were learning about the shofar later on in Rosh Hashanah, which hopefully was useful for everybody over Rosh Hashanah. It certainly was for me to do that Hazorah. Hopefully it was. And so we missed a few weeks when we were later on in the Masechta. But now we come back to, because the Gemara asks, it came up because of Yovel. Beautiful Gemara there, Daf Ches Amud Beis. And one of the comments we mentioned as we were talking about the Yovel, do you remember we spoke also about the Yovel year, when you've got, is it 49? Is the 50th year, where does the 50th year sit? But one of the comments we made was about the Yovel year, that there's Mosifin Mechol al HaKodesh. Yeah? This principle came up, if you remember, because strictly speaking, the Yovel year starts at Yom Kippur itself, and that's where everybody's free. But nevertheless, there is this 10-day prior to Yom Kippur of the Yovel year, and the Gemara there mentioned the idea that, of course, there's this principle of Mosifin Mechol al HaKodesh, and because we mentioned that principle, if you look here in Daf Tes Amud Aleph, 4 lines down, Uda Mosifin Mechol al HaKodesh Milonon. Worth remembering, this is the source. It does come up elsewhere too, but this is one of the sources where the Gemara is asking here. We mentioned en passant that there's this principle of Mosifin Mechol al HaKodesh, which means when we have something which is Kodesh, we add to it. And we are familiar with this principle, of course, on Shabbos, where although strictly speaking, Shabbos may come in, let's say, at sunset, we make Shabbos that in London, I think most places in England, they talk about a quarter of an hour prior to sunset. In Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim, it's 14 minutes before sunset is when Shabbos comes in. And the principle is it's slightly earlier than the real time of sunset or nightfall. We extend the Kedusha before and afterwards. And the Gemara is asking, where do we know this principle from? Umosifin Mechol al HaKodesh minolon. Have you got that minolon? 5 lines down, Daf Tes Amud Aleph. Where do we know this principle that we utilize, that Mosifin Mechol al HaKodesh, which means we add actually to something which is holy, we Mosifin Mechol from the profane to extend Kedusha. We have this principle as we find it Shabbos Yom Tov, but in fact it's as we mentioned with Yovel, and we'll mention Shemitah and other examples. Says the Gemara, where do we learn this from? Have you got it Minolon? The Sanya, we've got a Brisa. And this is a posuk which comes up in Shemos Lamed Dalet. I've got that in front of me. Some people may have it in the sand around the side of their Gemaras. It's a posuk in Kisisa. And the posuk there, which is Lamed Dalet Chof Aleph, says, it's talking there about Shabbos. It said, Sheishes Yomim Ta'avoid, Uvayoyim Ashvi Tishbois, the seventh day is Shabbos. And then the posuk continues and says, Bechorish Uvakotsir Tishbois. You should rest from doing any chorish, is plowing, kotzer, actually the ktsira, which means cutting, harvesting, reaping the crops, that is forbidden. So the first part of the posuk talks about Shabbos, Bayom Hashvi Tishbois, and then 2 malachas are mentioned in this posuk, plowing and harvesting, cutting, ktsira. Says the Gemara, have you got it? 5 lines down. Bechorish uvakotzer tishbois. Rabbi Akiva Omer, the great Rabbi Akiva. Eino tzorich loima chorish v'kotzer shel. Well, why are these two malachas singled out? So there are two options that one can think of. When we talk about plowing or harvesting a field, you'd think, well, maybe we're talking here about Shemitah. And although a bit of a problem, because the first part of the pasuk is talking about Shabbos, and suddenly we've moved into Shemitah. Or you'd say this is actually talking about Shabbos, but then we got a problem. Why are these two malachas singled out, as we know from elsewhere, that there are 39 particular malachas which are forbidden on Shabbos? Why are these two singled out? So whichever way you look at it, you've got a problem, as we often find in the Gemara. Says the Gemara, if it's talking about Shemitah, Rabbi Kiva Omer, 6 lines down, you don't have to mention specifically chorish, which is plowing, or cutting the crops in the Shemitah year. Remember the Shemitah year when the land is fallow? Shari Kvanem, but there's another posuk. This posuk appears elsewhere, which says Sodcha lo sizra, v'chamacha lo sizma. There's a long psukim discussing in the beginning of Parshas Bahar, which talks about Shemitah year, and we know nothing, the land is not touched when it comes to Shemitah year. Yeah? Have a look at Rashi. Ein tzorech loimer chorish v'kotzil sheshvius. It can't be talking about chorish and kotzil of shvius itself, says Rashi. Da'ar kochacha. Strictly speaking, literally, it means against your will. Akocha means definitely. Afagav, even though dereisha dekra, the first part of that pasuk that I quoted, sheishes yomim ta'avod, 6 days you work, the 7th day is Shabbos. Yeah, Afagav dereisha dekra, the first part of that pasuk. Look at Rashi, beginning of the line. But Shabbos koi, it's discussing Shabbos. Because the pasuk itself says, Sheishes Yomim Tavoid. Says the Gemara, I'm forced to say that Seifei Ashvius, the last part, must be talking about Shvius. De'i Shabbos, if it really is talking about Shabbos for some reason, Horish v'kotze huda osa shalmaloches mi shari. That's the way Rashi's explaining. Why is Horish and Kotzir, which is plowing the field, cutting the crops, why is that specifically mentioned here? There are 39 malachas. So therefore, we'll go back to malacha for Shemitah. But Shemitah, we also know. Shemitah, we have a parsha in the beginning of Parshas Bahar, talks about in the Shemitah year, the 7th year, where the land is fallow, no works takes place on the land. Again, why is Chorish and Kotzir? It seems to be linking up something to do with the land, but why mention these malachas? Why mention the malachas at all? Don't mention, it's true, Chorish and Kotzir are the very basic avodah that would take place with Shemitah, but we know the halachas of Shemitah from elsewhere. So do you understand the point here? If it's talking about Shabbos as a problem, why single out these two? If it's talking about Shemitah, we know Shemitah from elsewhere. So what is this pasuk adding to the halachas of Shemitah? If you're talking about cultivating, talking about plowing or cutting the crops, with me? Says the Gemara,
we do single out on Shabbos lighting a fire, of course.
Very good. And the Gemara, very good. Lo savaru eish b'chol moshe seichem.
So
very good. And the Gemara, the beginning of Vayakel, got a chumash in front of me here. Vayakel, it's, as you say, sheishes yom iteos malacha, and then it goes into lo savaru eish. That's Simon, your question. Lo savaru eish, on which the Gemara will ask, why is it singled out?
Yeah, I was going to say the same. I was going to say the same thing. The lav yotzoso, the havor yotzoso, which is what Simon's alluding to. But there's no issur mentioned in this pasuk, so I don't think that the question wouldn't, with all due respect, is not the same. There it's speaking about lo savaru eish. So the Gemara says, why do you specifically point out that is,
mentioned. Yes.
yeah, but we're not talking about an Issur here, are we? Unless you're saying
We are. We're talking about two
yeah, it's
Isurim here.
okay, all right, Tishbos. All right, not a loisas there. Okay, it's not allowed.
It's true. It's true. It does say rest, which means don't carry out any work in the harvesting the field. So Simon's question needs an answer over there. It has an answer. Hadloka is different, and the Gemara has to deal with it. That same question is the question we're asking here. If it is talking about Shabbos, why is it singled out? So we prefer to say, well, it probably isn't talking about Shabbos, it's talking about Shemitah. Says the Gemara, if it's talking about Shemitah, we know about Shemitah from another Parsha. We don't need this at all. So the Gemara, back to our Gemara, says our Gemara, Elo, beginning of line is V'gomer. You got that? I think we still got a bit of interference there from somebody. Yeah. Elo, says the Gemara, it is talking about, this is where we started today, Horish shel Eresh Shavios. You can't do plowing even in the end of the year prior to Shemitah. Hanichnas l'Shvius, it's going into Shvius. And similarly, don't do any harvesting. Kotzil shel Shvius, if it's things that grew on Shemitah year, hayotze lemotzoi Shvius. So what do we see from there? Have a look at Rashi. Horish shel Erev Shvius. If you're doing any plowing, even though it's not Shemitah yet, it's the year before Shemitah, it's the 6th year, says Rashi, Shelo yacharosh sode ilon erev Shvius, a chorish sheyoel l'Shvius. Don't do any work on the year before Shemitah that will carry over into the Shemitah year. So what we're learning from Rabbi Akiva says, so we've got this idea, it's not just that Shemitah year itself is forbidden. The Issa is extended prior to the Shemitah year for doing the plowing, and post-Shemitah year for harvesting the field. I might have thought it's just a malacha you can't do in Shemitah year. You with me? So says Rabbi Akiva, no. From here we see this pasuk is telling us about Erev Shemitah. Yeah? In the 6th year, don't do any plowing. And in the 8th year, don't do any harvesting. And from there we see that although Shemitah year is meant to be just 1 year, we've got this principle of extension. It extends out.
How's that noted from the pasuk that we talk about Erev Shvius? How's that mashma?
I tell you, because if the Gemara asks, go back to the Gemara again. We get Rabbi Akiva Omer, beginning of the line Omer. Einu tzorich loima chorish v'kotzis sheshvius, shari kvanema sod cholosis ravacham cholosis ma. We know now it's true. It's true. It's superfluous. Now it's true. If we had our back to the wall, my video back on. Thank you. Thank you, Peter.
Okay. Also, apologies to Mervyn, but I keep muting him because his phone is making an interference noise.
Are you using the phone, Mervyn? Rather than the machine? I don't know. Okay. Yeah. So what we're saying here is it's superfluous. That's in answer to your question, Mervyn. Now, it's true. There are examples where sometimes we find that a mitzvah is repeated. And sometimes we will say that the repetition tells us that it's not just one mitzvah, it's 2 mitzvahs. But we prefer, if we can, to say, this seems superfluous, this posuk, and therefore we will utilize it for something else. And that's exactly what we're doing here. It's superfluous for Shemitah year. Why? Because we already have a parsha about Shemitah. So therefore we utilize it for the year before Shemitah, the 6th year. In other words, the plowing of the 6th year is forbidden, and we also use it for the harvesting of the year post-Shemitah in the 8th year. So we see this principle, although the Torah says you're only meant, what's forbidden as far as the field is concerned, looks like just the 8th, just like that Shemitah year, the 7th year, we see this principle of extension. We've added to the Shemitah year before the Shemitah year and after the Shemitah year. Okay? Have a look at the next Rashi. Kotzer shel Shvius. This is harvesting the Shvius produce, kagon, tuvua she'hevir shlish. If some of the corn, the grain, has already grown a third of its height, even though you're out of Shemitah year, it continues, the Kedusha of Shavuos continues out of Shavuos going into the 8th year, and prior to Shavuos, in as much as the plowing should not take place. So our question originally was, where do we ever find this principle of extending Kedusha? And we do find it here. We're extending the activities of Shemitah to earlier than Shemitah and post-Shemitah. That is the view of Rabbi Akiva. However, continue the Gemara, Rabbi Yishmael disagrees. He said, no, I do not accept that posuk is actually talking about Shemitah. It's, as we said at the beginning, the first part of the posuk is talking about Shabbos. It's a very interesting, we suddenly switched from Shabbos to Shemitah. Says Rabbi Yishmael, have you got it? The beginning of the line is Shavuos. Rabbi Yishmael says no. Ma chorish rishus af kotzir rishus. What does that mean? Just keep reading. Yotzo ketzir ha'omer shehu mitzvah. That pasuk, says Rabbi Yishmael, is not talking about Shemitah. It's talking about Shabbos. So our question was, if it's talking about Shabbos, why single out 2 actions, activities, when there are many more than 2 activities? Have a look at Rashi. Rabbi Yishmael, it's comparing, as we see in the old days, compare and contrast Chorish and Kotzir. Why? For Shabbos. What does that mean? Have a look at the Rashi. V'lo diber hakosov ela le'inyan Shabbos. This posuk, even the last part of the posuk, is not talking about Shemitah, like Rabbi Akiva learned, from which he learned the principle of Mosifim Mechoil ala Kodesh, but it's in fact talking about Shabbos. Kedich sivbei, as in fact we said at the very beginning, the outset, uvayoy mashvi tishbos. The first part of the posuk tells me, on the 7th day, refrain from work. And the posuk then continues and talks about 2 activities, plowing and harvesting. And it's coming to teach me a very interesting rule. Says Rashi, refrain from plowing and harvesting. Says Rashi, it's coming to teach you a comparison between plowing and harvesting. Plowing, says Rashi, ma chorish ein lecho chorish shel mitzvah. There is never a mitzvah to plow a field. Afilu lizroya, to sow. Let's say we do know, we're going to mention it right now, the mitzvah of the Omer. The Omer on the 2nd day of Pesach, what happens? We cut the Omer. I've got the posuk here. Cut, harvest, remember the barley, and bring it as the Omer. It's an Omer is a volume. Bring that volume of barley as a korban. Now the posuk does say, Katsaratem es katsira. You have to harvest, cut down the barley. What happens if you don't have any barley? Is there a mitzvah to plow the field? No. If you found a field which was already plowed, go ahead and sow some barley. There's no mitzvah per se of plowing. Now, clearly, if you're trying to grow barley or anything, one of the activities you'd need to do would be to plow. But there's no mitzvah to plow. If, for example, you found, for what happens, you'd plowed a field for some other activity, you could utilize it for your omer, for the barley korban, which is brought on the second day of Pesach. You with me? But that is not the case for the ktsira. You have to cut the barley before you bring it to the Beis HaMikdash. So, for example, for some reason, I don't know, the wind or whatever it was, you found some barley, wonderful, from this year's crop, which is already cut down. That's not good enough, because the Pasuk says, Uktsartem es katsira. You have to cut the barley. So, even in a mitzvah like barley, where you've got to bring this barley to the Beis HaMikdash, there's no mitzvah to plow the field. If you found it plowed already, good luck to you. You've saved some work. However, if you found the barley which has already been harvested for whatever reason, that will not count. You've got to do, there's a mitzvah of cutting the barley. Now have a look at Rashi. Beginning of the line is Tishbos in the Rashi. Halfway down the whole, have you got it? Tishbos? Bo lelamdecho is coming to teach you. Ma chorish ein lecho chorish shel mitzvah. There's never an act of plowing which is a direct command, go and plow. Afilu lizroya, even to sow, l'tzorech omer. Even if, for example, the shtei or shtei alechem, there's another korban which is brought on Shavuos, which is from wheat. You don't have to go and sow. If you're lucky enough, you've got some wheat which is already growing and you didn't sow it, that's fine. Shaharei imotzo chorush, if you found your field already plowed for whatever reason, ain't no chorish, there's no mitzvah. It's true, if you haven't got a plowed field and you're going to have to grow barley, you'll have to plow first, but there's no mitzvah as such as plowing. Do you understand? As opposed to ktsira, which is the cutting, you do find a ktsira, which is an actual mitzvah. You've got to cut the barley, okay? But we are comparing plowing to harvesting. Just like, carry on, Shaharei, we're up to. Shaharei motzo chorosh, I'm going back, the Rashi, beginning of 9 is chorosh. Eino chorish, you don't have to plow if the field is already plowed for you, for your omer. But nevertheless, the Torah is telling me in this pasuk, bechorish uvakotzir tishbos, refrain from doing the activity of plowing. Ba'ani oisroi, says Rashi, b'Shabbos. The Torah is forbidding plowing. What does that mean? The Torah wants to forbid anything which can never of its own accord be a mitzvah. With me? Chorish, plowing is never a mitzvah. That's what's forbidden. Avkotzir. Similarly, katsira, you know when the Torah says you're not allowed to do katsira, if it's similar to the activity of plowing. Plowing is never a mitzvah. So you know what katsira you mustn't do on Shabbos? A harvesting which is a non-mitzvah. Avkotzir, says Rashi, sha'ani oiseh lecha v'shel reshus ani oiseh lecha. Rabbi Shmuel is learning a very interesting principle from the fact that the Torah lists two malachos, placing them both together to teach us that just like chorish is never a mitzvah, and that's what's forbidden on Shabbos, similarly, your harvesting, if it's not a mitzvah, it's forbidden on Shabbos. Next Rashi, Yotzo katsir ha'imeshu mitzvah. This comes to exclude, says Rabbi Shmuel, katsira, if you are actually cutting, but you're doing it for a mitzvah, that will be mutter on Shabbos. So if it turns out if the second day of Pesach is on a Shabbos, you'd still be allowed, the Torah would allow you to cut the katsira, to do the harvesting of the barley, to bring it for this mitzvah. Otherwise, I would have said, no, you'll have to delay it for a day. Nope. Have a look at the next Rashi. Yotza katsira imeshu mitzvah. She'afilu motza kotzo. This is the crucial part. What happens if you go into the field and for some reason, winds or whatever, that you found barley on the ground sufficient for your needs? Says Rashi, even if you found it harvested, mitzvah liktzar, as we said, the pasuk says, ukatzartem es katzira. Continues Rashi, v'yesh lecha lilmod mikan. You can learn from here, shedoiche es hashavos. Very interesting. So Rabbi Yishmael says, this is not talking about Shemitah. It's not telling me about the principle of Mosifin Mechol ala Kodesh, but you know what it is telling me? It's telling me on Shabbos, you know what's forbidden on Shabbos? Activities which can never be a mitzvah. Activities which are a mitzvah are mutter on Shabbos. And therefore, for example, as there's a mitzvah to cut to harvest the barley, you'd be allowed to do that only for the mitzvah of bringing the omer on the second day of Pesach. Very
Would that
interesting.
be an example of Aseder Chalosas there?
You don't need that Aseder Chalosas. First of all,
I'm saying, would it be an example? Would it be an example that they could bring as a proof of Aseder Chalosas?
No, I tell you why. Because there you're talking about the losas here you're talking about is Shabbos.
Yeah.
And you won't find an asay being doicha. This is a mitzvah of Shabbos, which is a lav. And in fact, that's exactly what the Torah is telling us. Don't learn from here that in any example, you can always have an asay can be doicha, any asay, it doesn't matter, like Shabbos, even though it's so severe. No, there's something very special about this. There's a posuk to tell me that if you're cutting for a mitzvah, the Shabbos does not apply to it. But don't learn from here anywhere else that I say dochalosa say, because maybe this is different, because there's this particular posuk. In fact, you remember the old days of Yevomus? We learn from other examples of
Shatnez.
Yeah, we learn from other examples where ase dochalosa say, but we don't normally say if it's a losa say where it is so severe, like a Shabbos, Chiyuv Misa, we wouldn't necessarily say ase dochalosa say. So don't learn that from here. That's because we've got this particular posuk. Other examples, we'd have to compare and see what exactly the Avera compared to the mitzvah would be.
Are we saying
good point.
Anything that's the Shem mitzvah, even though it would not normally be allowed on Shabbos, would be allowed on Shabbos? Anything. Trying to think of an example, but
Bris Milah.
Sorry, Bris Milah.
Bris Milah, maybe, yeah.
Well, the obvious one, shofar, isn't.
Sorry?
The obvious one, shofar and lulav are not, or the obvious one.
No. Well, we spoke about this. Shofar and lulav actually is mutter. There's nothing wrong with blowing a shofar. I don't know if we got our trumpeter with us. Blowing a shofar is a chokhmah. It's not a malacha. It's not forbidden for the chachomim said don't blow or don't shake a lulav. Whereas you're right, Simon, good point. If you're talking about bris milah, although there is a pasuk which says of Ayoyim Hashmini, Yimol B'sar Olosai, from here, unless you want to say only these two, there's another point you could learn from Rashi.
Bris milah, though, is only if it's bismana.
Oh yeah, if it's bismana, yes. But I think the point.
And if it's not a cesarean, so it's only if it's...
Oh yeah. But it does say Bayoim Hashmini Yimol B'sar Olosa, which otherwise you wouldn't be able to do it on Shabbos. So it looks like, Simon, back to your question as well, that we're only comparing Chorish and Kotzir. It's only focusing on this Katsira. Have a look at Rashi again. Yotza Katsira Shafila Motzokot, right? Yesh Cholilma Bikan Shedoiche Es HaShabbos Katsira. So it looks like this is coming to tell me only about Katsira. interesting way to tell us this rule, but it's not focusing, because you're right. If it's coming to tell me in any example, which is a mitzvah, it will be doicha, then you wouldn't need a specific ruling. We learn from elsewhere, ubayom hashmini, on that 8th day, if it is, your rights, Anthony, if it's not cesarean, and then on the 8th day, there's another posuk elsewhere to tell me you're allowed to do a bris milah, even though there's what's called a chabola, letting the blood, which is normally not allowed on Shabbos, like shchita would be forbidden on Shabbos. Nevertheless, here we're saying, it seems like only to tell us this rule regarding katsira. And that's what we seem to be learning here. Yotza katsir ha'omer, af kotzir. So it's only this comparison of chorish and kotzir that we're making, but it doesn't extend elsewhere. But this is according to Rabbi Yishmael.
Can I just ask very quickly? Can I ask something?
Yes, and somebody.
Me, Malcolm.
Oh, Malcolm. Yes, hello, Malcolm.
Sorry.
Yes.
Just what Anthony said about the lulav and the shofar. So you have got a mitzvah to blow the shofar.
Yes.
And you have to carry the shofar. So
Yes.
you're not exempt. You're not exempted from the prohibition from carrying, in order that you should fulfill the mitzvah, right?
That's right.
But according to this, you are exempt. According to the Katsir, you're exempted from the prohibition.
Absolutely. Only, but that seems to be only for Katsira. This posuk is especially telling us Katsira and Chori. In other words, plowing and harvesting. Harvesting is like plowing. We're plowing, but we don't seem to be learning that right across the spectrum.
There is another difference. I mean, I think what Malcolm was saying was that you've got two things with shofar. You've got the carrying bit, and you've got the blowing. Yes. If the blowing the shofar wouldn't have been permitted, actually it is, but therefore the carrying, which has nothing really inherently to do with the mitzvah itself, that would never be wiped out. So actually, that is not doita under any circumstances.
Yes,
it's only the action itself. A katsira is only one thing. It's not. There's no other prohibition on Shabbos other than katsira itself, which is the mitzvah.
Quite right. Quite right. As opposed to, for example, let's say another example. Let's say wearing tzitzis with shatnez. When you're wearing a talis which has got shatnez, at the same time you're having one. At that very time, you're doing the mitzvah and the vera. You're quite right. Whereas opposed to the shofar, you're not blowing the shofar at the same time as you're doing the avera of carrying through the street. And that carrying through the street is not fundamental to blowing the shofar. With me? The point there is that the shofar, as we said before, is not a malacha. But it's so because the Chachomim made a gezerah because. Yeah, so this is very different. Here we're saying the actual katsira is a mitzvah. There's a mitzvah, cut the barley.
But sorry, Norman, just to go back to Mila, you can carry the knife on Shabbos through the Rishus Harabim. To carrying.
Can you?
Can you not carry?
Don't think you can. You're not doing. It's not at that time you're doing the mitzvah. I said
Dr. Chalk used to bring the kit round on the Friday if you had to do a meal on the Saturday.
Absolutely, yeah. Oh yeah, everything's got to be prepared for Shabbos.
But if you haven't got it, then I think
I don't think you can.
I'm just check with the Mishnah on.
Yes, please.
Isn't it one of those files you got?
Sorry?
No, it's Ased Chalosa only applies is at the same time. So I tell you when it does apply, and that's very different. Of course, we got a special posuk for that. The actual Mila itself is causing a chabola, calling this wound, of course, at the time of the Mila. There, at that very time you're doing the mitzvah, you're doing the Avera. Yeah?
Isn't this the difference between mitzvah habor b'avera, mitzvah machmos avera? Is this the difference between those?
Yeah, there's also you've got the idea of mitzvah habor, where it's only because of the avera you can do the mitzvah, like stealing. Yeah, okay, that's another area. But what we're focusing on here is we've got one specific, and I think that is the point, is specifically Katsira we're focusing on. And we're saying Katsira is similar to Choresh. Just like Choresh is never a mitzvah, and that's forbidden, similarly Katsira, which is not a mitzvah, is forbidden. But if it is a mitzvah, it will be permitted, and do not say any other, we're talking here about Hilchos Shabbos, and it's specific to the mitzvah of Katsira. So, Anthony, did you find anything you
it says it's in the Mishnah. I'm trying to get the.
Oh, well, we'll come back to that. We won't forget you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, back to our Gemara, which does mean, therefore, whilst we've had this wonderful pshat in this posuk about Bechorish of Akot Tishbais, I think we've forgotten the original question, which often happens. What is the original question? Where do we...
Rabbi Eliezer said you can carry a knife, but it's not necessarily. I think it wasn't the main view in the Mishnah.
Yes.
And then I will try to find you the Mishnah.
All right, we'll come back to that. So what we're saying here is that, what was the original question? Where do you know, from where do you learn that you are Mosef Mechoil ala Kodesh? So according to Rabbi Akiva, we learned it from this posuk. It's talking about Shemitah, and Shemitah isn't just the Shemitah of the year, this seventh year, it's prior to the seventh year and after the seventh year. Fine. So Rabbi Yishmael, no, it's not talking about Shemitah, it's talking about Shabbos, with this wonderful pshat telling us that the cutting, the harvesting of the barley is a mitzvah, it's permitted on Shabbos. In which case we go back to Rabbi Yishmael and say, Rabbi Yishmael, where do you learn the principle of Mosifin Mechol ala Kodesh? Back to our Gemara. Says the Gemara, beginning of line is mitzvah. Got the word mitzvah just under halfway down. For Rabbi Yishmael, Mosifin Mechol ala Kodesh minole. From where does he learn the principle of Mosifin Mechol ala Kodesh? Robert, are you okay? Oh, okay. All right. Feeling all right? As long as you're feeling okay, yeah. Okay. Minole, beginning of the line is minole. From where do we learn this from? Says the Gemara, nafkele, from this beautiful halacha of Yom Kippur, one of the mitzvahs we all love. Which mitzvah do we look at this? Midasanya, there's a brisa. V'inisem es nafsho seichem, afflict nafsho seichem, betisha. What's this word betisha? The Pasuk says, I've got it round the side here, by Yikra, again in Emor, Shabbat Shabbosoi lochem, you should afflict your soul. Betisha, and it says, Betisha lachodesh bo'erev, the ninth in the night. May erev ad erev, from night to night, tishbesu shabbatchem, you should rest your rest. Seems like a lot of extra words there, and the Gemara will deal with each of those words. But 1 minute, there's a immediate question. What do you mean, the ninth in the night? Yom Kippur is already in that parsha. We know it says, by the 10th of the month, Asir l'chodesh. In that very posuk, in Emor, here we are. Be'osa l'chodesh hashvi, Yom HaKippurim hu, in Emor, chapter 23, 27. V'iznisem es nafsho seichem. Right? So that's E. I know what a day is. Shabbos goes from night right through the day. So I know that's applicable to Yom Kippur, fasting. Then the Pasuk says, Keep going till you get to Pasuk 32. Shabbat Shabbosim, and you should afflict your soul, B'tisha lachodesh bo'erev. The 9th in the evening. Well, no, the 9th in the evening is the 10th. And the Torah's already told us the 10th. What do you mean the 9th in the evening? Continue the Gemara. Again, beginning of line is nafsho seichem. But Tisha, it says on the 9th. Says the Gemara, Yochel b'Tisha. I might have thought it really means the Tisha. No. Talmud Loime, it says Bo'erev at night. So the 9th at the night, that's already the 10th. Bo'erev, if it would have said Bo'erev at night, Yochel mishetechshach. I might have then thought it means therefore at night, which is the 10th. But Talmud Loime b'Tisha. But it said the 9th. This is very confusing. It says you fast on the 9th when it gets dark and becomes and into the evening. Well, the 9th in the evening is the 10th. So what's he call it the 9th for? Ho ketzad maschil umisane miboid yom. From that 9th you are already fasting a little bit. Melamed shemoisifin. That's where we learn this principle. You are actually fasting a little bit on the 9th. And that's where we learn the principle, you're adding from the profane to give it Kedushas Yom Kippur. Says the Gemara, that's all very well when Yom Kippur comes in. What about the other end that we have to add a little bit? Where do we know the Tzioso? Talmud Loma, may Erev ad Erev, from a night to a night inclusive. Have a look at Rashi. Ad Erev, Laila, it means night. Who? Ad Bichlal. The possible particular, we know always, it's Vayerev, Vayivoka. This week, Sedra, we know a day is a night and a day. Why does it say may Erev ad Erev? Because it's teaching us the other end should also be a little bit of night. A little bit of nightfall goes into that Yom Kippur, right? Eini Ela Yom Kippur. That's very nice, but that's only Yom Kippur. Continues the Gemara, Shabbosos. How do you know you do the same principle on Shabbos? Tabloma Tishbasu. I want you to rest a little bit more resting than we've heard in the Aseres Adibros. There's some extra resting to do. Like you do on Yom Kippur, you add on a Shabbos. Says the Gemara, what about Yom Tov? Minayin Talmud Loma Shabbatchem.
Isn't there also on Tisha B'Av a similar thing, Norman?
We do. We always add to anything. We do add a little bit extra.
Is this the makar for it? I mean the eating on the day before Tisha B'Av. No, is there no? No. On Tisha B'Av, there is no, it's not a Yom Tov, it's not a Shabbos, it's not Yom Kippur. There's a Krimoid, it will hopefully sometime soon become a Yom Tov, but no. So therefore, when you look at the Hafsokah in your calendar, you'll find that is spot on sunset. You've got to make sure your watch is working well. But there's no extra time. Whereas if you look at, it's interesting, look at that week, that same week where you've got Tisha B'Av, look at the Shabbos during that week, and you'll find that the Shabbos, the Friday night, actually is earlier than the commencement of Tisha B'Av for that very good reason, because you're not adding to the holy, it's not, as we see, we've only got 3 examples here, and as we know, Tisha B'Av is midrabanon. There's no kedusha attaching. I wonder whether this was the makar, where they had a support. It was a smachta, and a smach from this.
For what? For Tisha B'Av?
I misunderstood. I thought there was. I thought it was that we did. You had to eat on the day before. You had to eat on the day before Tisha B'Av. I thought it was actually prohibited to not to eat.
I think you're thinking of the Gemara coming up right now. You're thinking
Probably.
about Yom Kippur. I think you're thinking of this Gemara here. Look at this.
But Norman, sorry, David.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to say, is this in any way connected to the principle of Lifnim Mishuras Hadin?
No, Lifnim Mishuras Hadin is going beyond the letter of the law. The law here is telling us that Kedusha is not confined just to that day, but it's extended outwards slightly. Very important lesson. When you've got the Kedusha, you need the preparation to receive that Kedusha, and hopefully you're taking that Kedusha a little bit into the rest of the mundane and the chol. Lifnim Mishuras Hadin is normally where you're going beyond the letter of the law. But here the letter of the law is telling us that Shabbos is not just going from night to night. There's a little bit more extra as well. And that is not because of Lifnim Mishuras Hadin, that is actually the din.
What would an example be of Lifnim Mishuras Hadin?
Lifnim Mishuras Hadin, where I don't really need to pay you back under these circumstances, whatever the rule is, and I decide I will pay you back.
Right.
An example like that. If that's it's normally would be Ben Odom Lachavero, where the Beis Din would say that in fact I am exempt from the payment, whatever the case is, and we go Lifnim Mishuras Hadin, and I say, okay, no, I'm prepared to, although the money's really mine, we'll split it or something. Go beyond the letter of the law. Here we're saying the law actually tells us that the Kedusha is extended, both for Shabbos and Yom Tov, and indeed for Yom Kippur. Okay? Continue the Gemara. Ketzad.
Sorry, just a quick one. On the Lashon here for Yom Kippur, it's a little odd because Me'erev ad Erev, but the meaning is different in each case. In one case, it's saying before Yom Kippur.
No. That's because of the Tisha.
Yeah, but the Erev on Yom Kippur doesn't mean before sunset, it means after.
Correct.
Whereas the Erev on the Tisha is
no. That's from the word Tisha, because it's the 9th. If it's night, it won't be the 9th, it'll be the 10th. So Mitisha B'Chodesh, from the 9th, actually before you get to that Erev, and you're going Erev ad Erev, from that night to the following night, and actually you're going therefore into 11. Let's read that again.
Norman, wouldn't it be...
1 minute. Let's just finish that point from Sam. Are you with me, Sam?
Not entirely. Yeah.
Talmud
if Erev is before nightfall, then it can't mean...
No. It's the Erev is not before nightfall. The 9th is. Yom Kippur is on the 10th. So why does it mention the 9th? And if it says the 9th at Erev, which, as you quite rightly say, means nightfall, that is not the 9th. That's the 10th. I don't know what's going on here. That's what the Gemara says. Ibo Erev, exactly. You said, Yochel Mishatek. Look at the Gemara. Beginning of line Loima. Talmud Loima Bo Erev. Says Gemara Bo Erev, as you quite rightly say, Erev means nightfall. Speaking, it can't be, but that's very strange. If it's nightfall, it's not the 9th anymore. What is going on in this posuk? Talmud Loima B'Tisha. It starts at the 9th, then goes into nightfall, and goes right up to the next nightfall a little bit. And that will give you 9th. That's your Mosifin at the beginning. The end nightfall is already the next night. That's already day 11. And there you've got your Mosifin Mechol ala Kodesh. And the Gemara then finishes, Ketzad, beginning line is Ketzad, 8 lines up. Kol mokum sheyesh bo shvus. Whenever there is some shvus, which means refraining from work, it's not Tisha B'Av, clearly Tisha B'Av wouldn't be referred to in the Torah anyway, but it's whenever there's a shvus. We find Yom Kippur called Shabbos Shabbosai, Yom Tov, Shabbos, Mosifin Mechol ala Kodesh, which is a wonderful pshat, which we now have, according to Rabbi Yishmael, the principle that we've added, because otherwise you've got a very big problem here. How can you call Yom Kippur the 9th? What's he called the 9th? Sam's not happy.
No.
You are happy?
Yeah, I'm happy, very happy.
Very happy, good. I'm pleased you're happy, Sam.
When does Baal Tosef apply?
Baal Tosef applies if you're adding to the mitzvah off your own bat. I'll give you, they talk about, for example, Baal Tosef. Well, there are two examples Rashi talks about in the Torah, and the Gemara mentions as well. Let me tell, we just had Sukkos. If instead of taking 4 species, you take 5.
Yeah.
If instead of having 4, your totafos, 4 boxes, as it were, you make 5.
No, I realize that, but here,
that's Baal Tosef. Here, the Torah, no, I see what you're getting at. You're getting at, maybe if we're adding to Yom Kippur, that's Baal Tosef.
Yeah. But you're saying Mosifin only applies where the Torah specifically says it applies.
Yes.
Yes. It's not a general rule.
No. You're right. Otherwise, you're into Baal Tosef. You're right. Can't just make it up yourself. No, quite right. Somebody would take 5 species, that would be Baal Tosef. The mitzvah is meant to be 4, and 4 alone. They're meant to be 4 totafos, beinenecha, not 5.
By the way, it would be impossible to hold Shabbos. Exactly. So you'd have to be Mosif anyway.
Oh yeah. No, I understand what you're saying. But the reason why you're being Mosif is because you're not sure. Here, the Torah is saying there's a mitzvah. There's a mitzvah of Tosfos Shabbos.
Do we add at the end of Shabbos? Do we add in the same way?
Yes. If you look at the time, have a look at it. In a luach, you'll find it's few minutes more. How many minutes? There are questions, of course. How many minutes you need? But yes, it is more than nightfall. And the way to tell the difference would be if you find, for example, if Tisha B'Av is that week, look at when Tisha B'Av finishes and look when Shabbos finishes. So when Tisha B'Av finishes, actual night. When Shabbos finishes, it's that plus a couple of minutes. And let's learn from this Gemara.
Why would it be impossible to start Shabbos exactly? I didn't follow that.
No, Simon's point was, even with our lovely watches, to know that Shabbos, let's say sunset, to get sunset spot on, you're going to have to go a couple of seconds earlier than that.
There's an argument that says you cannot define a point in time.
Yeah, a point. It's like the area under a curve at a point is naught.
Like a point in space, you can't actually define.
Yeah, you can't define.
So you're after it, you tend towards it. Yeah, you're not.
Yeah. So example, Shabbos comes in at 6 o'clock dead. You can't hit 6. So obviously you're going to have a minute before.
But you just said before we define Tisha B'Av, we have an exact moment when Tisha B'Av starts. You said
that's true. That's true. So you're absolutely right. If you look in the calendar, you'll see when is sunset. So you need to know, for example, if sunset on that day is 8 o'clock, you need to stop eating by 8 o'clock. So you're not going to be eating at that second, but you know when the deadline is. With me?
All right. So for Melachas Shabbos, you can say the same thing.
No. For Melachas Shabbos, that's the point Simon was making. When you stop work before Shabbos at 8 o'clock or 6 o'clock, you're not stopping because Shabbos is starting at 6. There's a specific mitzvah to make Shabbos start at 5 to 6.
No, I understand that, but he said because you couldn't. I don't understand why you can't stop exactly.
Well, you can't, it's a good point. You can't actually define a point in time.
Yeah, but you can stop eating on Tisha B'Av. I don't see what the difference is.
You're going to have...
Yeah. No, on that, the second, for example, you say 6 o'clock, you'd have to stop all your work by 6 o'clock. That's true. But here we're saying you've got to add something extra.
No, I understand. I was just going to point about why you couldn't be Shabbos. I didn't.
I think it's just stopping work by that point.
Yeah, just like on Tisha B'Av, you can stop at 8:47. If you have to stop eating at 8:47, you'll do it.
Yes. But the question is, you'll always have a problem. Make sure your watch is right. And,
that's a separate issue. Fair
enough. Fair enough. But we're left with one question, which I'm not sure we're going to finish today, which is what
Norman.
Yes.
Sorry. Nice.
Yeah.
Sorry. There's a sort of an overlap between this sort of idea that when you add the time, that you're extending the kedusha of, let's say, the Shabbat.
Yes.
So you don't want to get into a situation where by mistake you will...
Oh, that's exactly the point.
It's the fence around the fence. It's the fence.
No. There's a fence issue. Imagine, let's say a very simple example, Tisha B'Av. a person wants to fast on Tisha B'Av, they want, and Tisha B'Av comes in at 9 o'clock in the summer, right? So it's true. You don't want to go beyond the 9 o'clock. So you're going to stop. I wouldn't say a fence, you're watching, nobody's quite sure so you'll stop a minute or two before anyway. What we're saying on Shabbos, you're not stopping doing your work and you're driving, whatever you're doing, driving or you're on the computer. You're not going to stop a minute before just because you don't want to hit the deadline. There's a specific mitzvah to add time to Shabbos. And that's why you'll find that there are extra minutes. I say in Yerushalayim, they've added 40 minutes before the real deadline. Not because they're worried about offense, not because they're worried about going beyond the time. There is a mitzvah from this Gemara we've learned today, Mosifin Mechol ala Kodesh. That's all we're saying. So there's a very big difference. It's not because we're,
I understand the difference. I understand the difference, but surely there's also the fence, because I mean, for Shabbat particularly,
you're right.
Is it performing two functions, or do you have to take your 14 minutes and then add an extra 2 minutes as a fence? I mean, that's also mitzvah, isn't it?
No, I see what you're saying. Yeah, there's a mitzvah of the fence, but here in this country, we generally have a 15 minutes. 15 minutes is more than a fence. 15 minutes means you're making Shabbos 15 minutes before. There are different places have different numbers. But here you'll always find if there's a 15 minutes extra, which is for what they call Tosfos Shabbos. And at the other end, there's going to be extra minutes, nothing to do with fences, because you're scared. Oh, I've turned off my machine again. Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, that it's not just the fence. That's all I'm saying. And it's there not because
sorry, Norman, but where do you get the 15 minutes from? Then it's arbitrary, isn't it?
It is arbitrary, and every community makes their own rules. Absolutely, it is arbitrary. Yes, arbitrary. How much? You're right. Yerushalayim is 40 minutes. Tel Aviv is not 40 minutes.
So doing a malacha in that 15 minutes is as bad as doing malacha.
No, it isn't. But it isn't, because it's not actual. It's not the same. It actually isn't night yet, but it's still, it's an avera. But once you be makabel Shabbos, of course you can make Shabbos much earlier as well if you like. The earliest you can make Shabbos is what they say a plag hamincha. It's called an hour and a quarter seasonal hours before Shabbos. You can make Shabbos earlier, and you can make Shabbos much later as well. A lot of these rebbes, you've got these rebbes tishes in lots of places where they go on well into the night, and they're still shut. They haven't, they're still calling it Shabbos. So you can extend your Tosfos Shabbos. There's no mitzvah on Tisha B'Av of extending Tisha B'Av. There's no mitzvah of Tisha B'Av fasting. That was, I think, Mervin's question before. There's no mitzvah to have, to stop eating before Tisha B'Av a quarter of an hour before. You don't have to. No reason at all. Whereas on Yom Kippur, there is this mitzvah. You'll find Yom Kippur comes in at this time, and you'll find it is some extra minutes. Okay? So the only question we haven't answered, and we're not going to answer today, I don't think.
Norman, can I come in here quick?
You certainly can. Can't see you, Charles. We can see your hand. Ah, yes, Charles, yes. You're on the, you're muted.
Where does the rule of the 18 minutes leeway come in?
Sorry, which 18 minutes leeway?
I understood that if you are pressed for time, then you've got 18 minutes after Shabbat comes in to finish off what you have to finish off.
If anything, it would be 15.
Okay, 15.
But even then, you're right. If you will be real, if you're pushed, we're careful with saying this is being recorded, isn't it? There's a mitzvah of Tosfos Shabbos, right? So whatever that deadline is, you've got to have 2 or 3 minutes at a minimum to increase the time of Shabbos. Yeah?
Yes.
The minhag, has say here, is 15 minutes, right? In that 15 minutes, because it's the minhag here. And I don't want people to be lenient on that because that is the minhag. London, I think throughout the UK, it's 15 minutes. However, there is a mitzvah of Tosfos Shabbos, which could just be 2 minutes. There was a very interesting case, and the case is Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zichrono Livracha, where, for whatever the reason was, and it's perhaps your case, Charles, he was seen in a car after the time Shabbos came in. And whatever the reason was, now it's Shabbos, in other words, it was after that 15 minutes, assuming there's a 15 minutes rule in New York as well, and somebody approached him and said, Rabbi, you were coming to shul, whatever it was, and it was after the official time of Shabbos. And he says, well, strictly speaking, you need a few minutes for the Tosfos Shabbos. But if people here are therefore thinking that one can be lenient about that, there was a particular reason why he was in the car, and it wasn't, I'll say it was still within those 15 minutes, but it wasn't the full 15 minutes, if you see what I mean. Therefore, from then on, he said, I'm going to change my ways. Because if this is people going to learn from that, in other words, you're quite right. That 15 minutes is not meant to be played with, but under certain circumstances, yes. But again, if anything, it would be you're allowed an extra 5 or 10 maybe, but no more than that. Yeah? So back to your question.
And where is that derived from?
That's derived from Al Gemara, who says you've got to make Tosfos Shabbos. But Al Gemara does not tell you how long it's got to be. So the minhag here is 15, I say Yerushalayim, 40. I think quite honestly, if you were in Yerushalayim, you'd find there are lots of people driving around in cars after the 40, yeah, but not 15 or 20 minutes before Shabbos. You with me? So
just to clarify for Charles, I mean, it's the published time in London adds 15 minutes, right? That's the minhag to add minutes to the.
That is already with the extra 15 minutes added. And what Charles is saying, if you were really, really pushed, whatever that was, maybe you could shave a couple of minutes off that 15. Not suggesting you do, but maybe 5, or something. If you were real, there you are stuck in a car or something, maybe you could take a couple of minutes off that. But watch out, because, and then you're up to your fence, the Malcolm's fence that we're talking about, that you want to make sure you actually don't hit the real deadline. But so do you understand the point? Minat Torah, and that's when Malachas come in, and the real Chiyuv starts whenever sunset is. Tosfos Shabbos means we're adding to it. You can just add a few minutes to it. The minhag here is 15, which means, therefore, out of that 15, and I say I don't want people to be lenient now, but the couple of minutes may be leeway, couple of minutes off that 15. But there you are parking your car, and you're at 15 minutes, so maybe just park your car for a minute and rush into shul and leave your keys there or something. That would be acceptable. But watch out, because otherwise you will end up actually hitting the barrier, and then you will have problems. But the only problem we've left with is the following. According to Rabbi Akiva, and we'll finish with this, Rabbi Akiva learned the principle Mosifin Mechol ala Kodesh not from Yom Kippur. He learned it as we started off today, Bechoresh of Akotsev Tishbos Shmita. So the question now, this was Sam, you're not happy about this, well, you weren't, the Tisha Me'erev Ad Erev. According to the way we learned, according to Rabbi Yishmael, this is coming to tell us that you should add to Yom Kippur. According to Rabbi Akiva, we've already learned the principle of Mosifin Bechol al HaKodesh, in which case we're left with what is Rabbi Akiva going to do with that pasuk which says from the 9th? What's it telling us? Don't tell me it's telling us that Mosifin Bechol al HaKodesh, because I've already got that principle. So what's that telling? And this pasuk, it sounds very strange because it said you start fasting on the 9th.
Mosifin Bechol al HaKodesh, you said, is not a principle. It's applied. I mean, it's a principle that is applied in the specific cases where you can learn it out in the Torah, like Shabbos.
No. I've lost somebody here. Hold on.
Can you hear me?
Hello? Where am I? Oop, hold on. Am I? Yeah, here I am. Yeah, sorry, come back again. Yes, no. There are two things. There's the Mosifim Bechol al HaKodesh, and the other principle we had was, do you remember Choresh of HaKotzir?
Yeah.
So Choresh of HaKotzir is telling us that Katsira, the cutting, can only be done if it's a mitzvah. And that is specific to Katsira. The principle of Mosifin Bechol al HaKodesh, he is learning from Shemitah. If he's learning that principle from Shemitah, then why did the Pasuk here tell us, when it comes to fasting, that you start fasting on the 9th? The Torah doesn't need to tell us that. It would fit into the normal rule of Mosifin Bechol al HaKodesh. So in fact, the Gemara asks, and we won't answer this today, for Rabbi Akiva, Haidi Nisem es nafshoy seichem, 6-7 lines up, Betisha my ovidle. What is Rabbi Akiva going to do with that pasuk, which we had difficulty with, and we utilize it to tell us Mosifim Bechol al HaKodesh, you start fasting on the 9th? Rabbi Akiva, you don't need that. You've got it from Shemitah already. Rabbi Yishmael didn't have it from Shemitah because he was learning, he was talking about Shabbos. But Rabbi Akiva, yeah, that was Rabbi Yishmael. He says, Bechorish of HaKotzir is talking about Shabbos. Rabbi Akiva says, Bechorish of HaKotzir is talking about Shemitah, telling me about extending, in which case, the pasuk that tells me here on Yom Kippur, they'll start fasting on the 9th, that's totally unnecessary. It must be coming to tell us something else. What is it coming to tell us? We will have to wait and see. But it's coming to tell us a mitzvah, a great mitzvah that I think most people like. I think everybody likes this mitzvah it's coming to tell us, which is eating on Erev Yom Kippur. The mitzvah to eat on Erev Yom Kippur. That's what it's coming to tell us. I know otherwise you won't sleep for a week. But how we learn that out from, in other words, we're learning there's actually an equivalence. Like there is a fasting on the 10th, there's a mitzvah on the 9th of doing something which is equivalent to fasting, which is actually the opposite, eating. There's a mitzvah to eat on the 9th of Yom, the 9th, the day before Yom Kippur, and that we'll have to look at next time. The reason for that, does it apply to everybody? It's a positive mitzvah, we'll see. Ill people, ladies, it's going to be very interesting. The reason for it, very interesting tshuvas of Reb Kiva Eger that we'll have to have a look at. But that's all being well. Let's say that's the trailer, as they say, for next week. And all being well, hopefully we'll meet up. Good to see everybody. We've seen up 15 of us here. Anybody we didn't say hello to yet?